Today, we're unpacking the power of the emotional intelligence in building healthy, lasting relationships. My guest is Alec Chapa, a conciliation specialist within the U.S. Department of Justice's Community Relations Services. Based in San Antonio, Texas, Alec has dedicated his career so far to helping communities resolve conflict and build bridges through mediation, facilitation, and training. In this conversation, we're diving deep into why emotional intelligence is more than just a buzzword and why it's a critical skill that is necessary for navigating conflict, fostering understanding, and creating the kind of relationships that thrive. You won't want to miss that conversation, I can assure you, but I won't say more and let you discover my discussion with Alec Chapa. The whole discussion that we were going to engage on is about emotional intelligence. And let's first say how we came to talk about this, because we saw one reels on Instagram, and that reel was making the parallel between being emotionally intelligent and being able to cry as a man.
hmm
And my first reaction was, that has nothing to do, but that's my perception, first as a
hmm
woman and also as mediator, positive psychology practitioner, but your perception is probably different. So what is for you emotional intelligence?
Yeah, well, so I think it has to do, and first of all, I'm not sold, on this, but this is the tree on which the tree branch on which I land for the moment, right? I'm sure I'll look at it differently in 5 years and 25 years. But in my experience and studying these concepts, dealing with conflicts in my own life, helping parties to see it, you see a lot of what it's not. So before I get into that, I'll just kind of say it's really, in my view, marked by emotional perceptiveness, emotional discernment, reach, what I'm calling reach, and it's really empathy. But I have a reason for calling it reach. And then expression. I think expression is a part of it, although I wouldn't say it's a fundamental part of it. It's a little bit more like a symptom as opposed to fundamental. The inability, and I'll just say a quick remark about this, the inability to cry, for example, or the maybe not the inability, but the feeling the pressure to hold an emotion back, I think is in some ways is symptomatic. It's not necessarily this, but it seems symptomatic of an inability to handle some of the emotions underneath that, right? So, for example, shame. If a man were to feel like, well, I have this feeling of grief, right? I just lost somebody I tremendously care about. How can I possibly not cry over them, and we can imagine who that might be. And feeling, okay, this tremendous, I want to cry, but then feeling the shame of, well, if I express this and, that's going to bring me all kinds of shame and how will I be looked at? To me, that's symptomatic of not being able to overcome or handle that shame, in a more productive way so that you can freely express what you are feeling.
And you bring a very interesting point because it's a feeling I have from this today's society that there's a lot of pressure around men's. They have to show their own vulnerability. They have to be able to talk about their own emotion, and even more pressure is in a romantic relationship. It seems to be that women now expect the men's to be as able as they are to talk about their own emotion, which is, in my experience, now I'm married with someone that is a little older, but in my experience, men's don't manage their emotion the same way. Why? Mystery of the universe, but there is a lot of difference on how emotions are approached. And is that a pressure you feel as well, that as a man, people expect you to, what people, your partner or women generally expect to be able to show your vulnerability as easily as women can do?
Absolutely. And that's because I think I have it easier than what I perceive a lot of other men to have. the experience of, whether that's here in the Deep South, San Antonio, right? Kind of Hispanic, Chicano culture, right? There's the
Cultural difference.
machismo, but also I think just generally, even beyond our region, I spent time in the Midwest, in the Pacific Northwest, and it's not all the same, but I think I generally have it a little bit, maybe even a lot easier than some other folks do. But yeah, I feel the pressure. Um, I think some of that pressure is organic, right? We want to be able, just as people, um, who care about others, we want to be able to like give our best self to them. If you see somebody struggling, and it could be the simplest thing, an old elderly woman struggling with a grocery cart or something in the market parking lot, you want to be able to help her. And it's just kind of a tough feeling when you can't. So some of that's organic, but I think some of it is very much what is portrayed in the media, what is portrayed in Hollywood, et cetera. And yeah, you see the pressure and the what happens to people that whether it's an accurate example, right? What happens to a man if he chooses to be vulnerable? Do other men ridicule him? Do they celebrate him? How do women respond? How do men tell other men that women will respond, right? These are all factors.
Well, you bring so many things on the table. You first you're quickly talking about cultural differences and society, how Hollywood and all the movies and it belongs to the culture as well from each country, how they approach that, and that's very, very important. I know having an international background as well. I could see the differences, how, people behave in different countries. So I think you see it too. And now being in Texas, it's even more different. It's different. Like I used to be, living in Europe between Germany and France and traveling to Romania. Even Romania is also very different. And it's pretty close to Germany. Like it's really close to France and Germany. So yeah, there is this whole influence of Mexico and probably as a French, I can also see Texas as tough. And I think it's cultural, not necessarily from the influence from Mexico, but also the history of Texas, because people had to fight for their own freedom in history.
Mhm.
And I feel it created that tough culture that you can perceive when you're not from here. So that's very interesting. And the other point you're talking about is actually the individual responsibility to, where we are in a couple, for example, in a romantic relationship. How do I respond to my partner, or what space do I give to my partner to show what they need to show? And what you said and I heard is individual responsibility. So that's very interesting. And I wonder, do you think it's essential in a romantic relationship to be able to have a certain level of emotional intelligence? Do you think a couple can be happy only if only both are emotionally intelligent at a certain level?
Well, that's a great question. I think in order to answer that, we have to some extent, have at least a broad shape of what is a relationship and what is it supposed to be, or what is it supposed to do, right? What
Mm.
measure do we bring to it? Um, and the first thing I'll say is there's plenty of people that look to their partner, and I'm not saying this is great or not great. It has its pros and cons, so to speak, but there's plenty of people that look at a romantic relationship, especially in marriage, when you commit yourself to somebody exclusively for the rest of your life, that they need to be, and you for them, they for you and you for them need to be everything that you could look for. And Esther Perel, a very popular therapist and sociologist, talks a great deal about this. They need to be your best friend, your lover, your business partner, your
Your
and
coach.
so on and so on. Yes, your coach, everything. And that's tremendous. That is tremendous. The next closest thing we get to that, in my view, is a parent, right? Because a parent, shoulder to cry on, the coach, the and so on and so on, right? And anyone that has kids know how tremendously tough that is. But that's only for, a certain period of time, 18 years, 26 years, wherever you draw the line, right? Until that you take a step back as a parent. But with a marriage, that never ends. Now, on the other hand, a lot of folks don't come to a relationship or a marriage with that view that they need to be your everything. There's this kind of view that it takes a community to raise a child, a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
Well, maybe very well it takes a community to live a flourishing life, and you can't find that in just one person. So
Yes.
there's sort of this other view that can be you can find diverse sources, so to speak, of your happiness and your flourishing and just your well-being, you know?
Yeah. So do you think it helped and it helps for you in your relationship to have learned all those tools as a mediator, ombudsman, and also all the studies you've done around conflict management? Do you think it helps today? Like I think you're engaged, so obviously you're committing. And do you think it's something that everybody should know at a certain level to make a marriage work, or not, even if people are not necessarily marrying anymore, but at least committing on a long-term relationship?
Absolutely. Undoubtedly, what I say, invest in yourself. And everywhere that that self goes, you will bring just more to that engagement, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life. And that's true whether relationships to the core of what you do, as with me, for example, you could just work in sales. Sales is the most transactional job there is really, right? And even yet, there's a movement away from transaction of just, oh, great, another call to sell me something, right? Who wants to engage with that? And on the other hand, even bankers, again, back to transactions, even bankers are moving away from that towards the relationship. So everywhere you see this movement away from the transactional, and that's not to say that there's no value in transactions. Sometimes it's a simple barter, right? You go to sell something, you don't really want to have a long-term relationship with this person, and that's fine. There's always going to be that, but more and more we're finding a move towards the relational approach to things. And anywhere that you have that, emotional intelligence is going to tremendously benefit you, right? I personally, I'll just offer a quick example being able to, observe, for example, that my partner is troubled. Okay, I'm observing these cues and indicators, clues, so to speak, right? That's that perceptiveness as opposed to being aloof and it went over my head and well, you looked about the same. I suppose you were a little this and that, but I didn't think about it until were screaming at me. Why don't you pay attention to me, right? Being perceptive, being discerning, right? I use that other word of thinking, okay, I can't read their mind, but I do know their history. I know their triggers, their peeves, all these things. Um, and I can have a good idea of what it might be, right? I know that they had this big, evaluation. So there's a good chance that it might be that, discerning and then being able to go to that place emotionally and saying, okay, well, I know if it was that, and there's a good chance that it was that, she's probably going to need some time.
Yeah. It's
That's going to tremendously help.
it's very interesting what you're saying because in the end, it's being your own observer. Observing the situation before reacting is something that we learn as a mediator, but not everybody learn that skill necessarily. So what you're explaining with your example is actually you're not trying to fix something right away. You're not trying to solve her problem. You're just here, you're observing, listening, you're trying to analyze a little bit what's going on without making assumptions, without anticipating anything. And that's something I'm always, when I have clients, always very encouraging is to never make assumption because in a romantic relationship, you see it very easily when as soon as you make assumption it's 50-50. Either you're right, good for you, but most of the time you might not be right because you don't know what happened today. You were at work, your partner was at work. You don't know. or your partner didn't sleep well. There's a lot of things. What you're talking about, the triggers are, it's something very, very important, I think. But I'm wondering, do you think it's something that takes more importance when you're going into a long-term relationship, like a partnership, a marriage, to be able to kind of have some um, view on what triggers might be, making that person defensive, or do you think it's something that is easier to do in a marriage?
More easily to do in a marriage? I suppose it depends. It's easier in the sense that we have, theoretically speaking, right, more time with this person. So there's more potential to have a richer, deeper, better understanding. On the other hand, not necessarily, right? Because at the same time as we can have understanding, we can also compile misunderstandings, assumptions, mistakes, that basically baggage that we bring to the situation and that they bring. And that could just further cloud things. Unfortunately, that's the reality. And I think that's a big part of why sometimes it doesn't work out between folks. It's possible to work things out, but that's where a mediator can step in and help, right? Okay,
Yeah.
normally there's a certain bandwidth wherein the folks can handle it by themselves, but then when it compiles and compiles, that gets to be a lot. I couldn't move a four-bedroom house by myself. I would get some help. So the same kind of thing when that emotional baggage piles up, getting an outside neutral can be tremendously helpful.
And that's very true. And you also talked about the possibility to kind of practice, how you respond to others in different contexts, either you're salesman or banker or anything that has to do with customers is actually probably a great experimental way to practice the emotional response you give. And
Mhm.
that's something I really like the example you gave. It's a really good one. Where probably the context where you have less emotional engagement or commitment in the relationship might be easier to try couple tools, couple techniques to respond in an emotional way that is, more intelligent. And I quote intelligent because to me, being emotional and intelligent has actually not really anything to do, but
Yeah.
yeah. No, that's very, and I must ask you, as a mediator, if you're triggered, how do you respond?
Oh, that is a great question.
Because we
And
all know we can't be mediator every day, 24/7, right?
no, 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 no. And it's funny because I reflect on this, and sometimes I'll just say this before I answer your question. Sometimes my clients are amazed by the insults that we are able to achieve as kind of a partnership, right? Where I'm supporting them and they're thinking through these things, and they go, "Wow, I love the way you said it," or something like that. And I'll it's so tempting, right? To, oh, I'm such a great coach or such a great mediator. But I just kick it back to them and say, no, 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 this is your thought. I just helped kind of refine it. But you're really the one that gave me the raw materials. And the reason why I was able to put it back to you a little bit more polished is because I'm the second editor, right?
Yeah.
The first draft is just never that way. And so I think a lot of this work has to do with the position that we're in, whether we're in the conflict or we're outside of it assisting with the conflict, right? We're always going to be a little bit more level-headed, or at least be able to be more level-headed when we're outside of it. So
Sure.
you're exactly right. When we're in the conflict, oh man, it is challenging. For me, um, it's tough. I can get frustrated. I think I'm somebody that um, wasn't always understood. As a kid, I tended to be a little bit mature for my age. That's what a lot of folks told me, and it had a lot to do with hanging out with people that were much older than me at the time. But that's neither here nor there. So, as developed, I was mature, and I had thinking all these different things and philosophy and all this stuff. So I tend to be a little bit sensitive around being misunderstood. It's something I've worked on and got a lot better at. But if somebody is not understanding me, whether it's because I can't find the right words because I'm all worked up, or the other person is making assumptions for the worst, or maybe for the better, but they're just not understanding, right?
Mm.
That's very frustrating. So I really have to just take a minute and like, all right, take a deep breath, come back to it in a minute when you've got better words, more constructive words.
So you're sitting with your frustration.
Yeah, very much so.
I think it's an exercise that we're practicing as a mediator. I like to think that because we're also helping others to do this, then we're, having that effect that has an effect on us, and we're also practicing to do it for ourselves. It's something I'm learning to do as well, and I think you never stop learning that.
I agree.
But yeah, that's I like what you said because it's really the idea to pause and again not react right away. And that's the escalation of conflict when you have dispute and arguments, whatever is going on. It's because people try to fix it right away. Either they're fearing the conflict and they run away, which is actually it's counterintuitive, but fearing the conflict and running away creates actually more tensions. But there is also this effect that people fear the conflict and try to fix it right away. But it's like, the baking. You're not gonna eat a cake when it's right out of the oven. You need to let it cool down. So it's this pose to have that is really, it's actually learning to do nothing.
For a period of time, right?
Yeah,
To
just
sort of
for a minute to cool down. Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The more information that we have, it's always going to help us. They talk about this in negotiation classes, master classes, workshops. The more experienced negotiator will do more listening because they're really gathering information. They become more of the grand master, so to speak. They see all the moving pieces, so they see more possibilities. And of course, they're going to go to the ones that their opponent or counterpart will say yes to, right? Okay, I see what you want. And out of all these possibilities, here are the ones that satisfy my interests as well, right? So they're doing a lot of listening as opposed to jumping at the first opportunity to make the sale, you know?
Yeah, I think the process of conflict, maybe I'm the weirdo, but I think it's fascinating to see, the all what is in the game when there is a dispute. All the needs, emotions, the interests, the position. It's really like a puzzle. So that's really fascinating. Um, Something I was curious to know is you're talking a lot about observing yourself, analyzing a little bit. So, what role self-awareness has for you? I can already guess your answer, but I want you to give more insight because, again, you don't learn at school to be aware of yourself necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, the first awareness you have is when you're a kid, you see reflect on a mirror, maybe. But being the self-awareness we're talking about as mediator is really more internal. So how how important is it and what can you say to people to practice more self-awareness?
Okay, so two-part question. I love it. Self-awareness, I think generally is this is a simple comparison, right? But I think the visual really helps to understand these abstract things for a lot of people, these emotions that are so far out there, and this sort of nebula of your emotions and my emotions and how do they mix to create harmony or chaos. I think about it like what is the game? You stack the pieces. I'm blanking on it. Tetris.
Yeah.
It's like a game of Tetris, right? We've all got different textures and grooves, right? The way that we respond to things, anger has a shape, sadness has a shape, and so on and so on. And when you have two people that are sad, well, they can commiserate together. And so there's a kind of rapport within that. There's a kind of shared experience that connects them within that. And so those two pieces fit really well together, we might say. And then other ones, especially not just the emotion, but the way a person has learned to handle an emotion or respond to a situation with one. My dad, I'm just making something up. He used to get very angry, and so I'd get very small. I'd say very, very little. And so what happens if you put those two pieces together, right? You don't have a very good combination. They don't fit really well. So being aware of yourself, it's pretty key. I mean, you're only half the equation in a romantic relationship, but you're a very important half, right? And without that half, you're always going to be guessing on why did they respond the way that they did. And you can go through many years of your life thinking, gee, everyone seems to have the same reaction. I don't know why. It must be the world that's just so angry, and never realize maybe it has something to do with myself. It sounds comical when I say it out loud, but um, it can happen. So, being aware of yourself, being aware of the others, what can people do to work on this? I think it's creating safe spaces. And I know there's in some circles that's sort of an eye roll, oh, safe spaces and brave spaces. I actually prefer that term a little bit. There's some chitter chatter in the ombuds community about how do we create spaces where people know that on a fundamental level they're not going to be prosecuted, for example, or ridiculed, right? Shamed. Emotionally, that's very devastating. Brene Brown has done a lot of work on the destructive aspects of shame. Um, how do we create spaces where people are invited in and they're safe to a certain extent, but they're challenged? They can, as to make a comparison to the gym, they can reach a new PR. They can break themselves to a certain extent, a very small extent, but then repair themselves to be even stronger. How can they do that? Well, that's where it's brave, right? Create more spaces like this is my advice, and make a practice out of it. Even better if you can do it with your romantic partner. If you can't, that's fine. You can, like you mentioned, build it up in more low stakes scenarios, then come to the more high stakes.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying. There's a lot of gems in it. Um, in one of the aspects about self-awareness, in the end, you were talking about um, the difficulty of it for many people. And do you think that part of that difficulty for many people to question themselves and be aware of what their reaction is or what their emotional response is comes from their judgment and this not inability but the quick path to judge, because what happens if someone analyze and see, oh, I did something wrong, I didn't have the right response at that time. And what comes right after that is on judgment. I did something wrong. I'm not a good person. Rather than being curious and asking ourselves, okay, that was experiment. Life is an experiment. So that was maybe not the best response at that time. I learned next time I'll do different. Do you
Mm.
think it's the so yeah, back to the question, do you think the fact that people are not necessarily practicing self-awareness come from that strong judgment they have toward themselves?
I think that's a lot of it. It's I've heard this phrase before. Weakness is jumping to conclusions because you're afraid of not knowing.
Mm,
Right? I'm going to repeat that.
yeah.
Weakness is jumping to conclusions because you're afraid of uncertainty, not knowing. I think there's a lot of truth to that. It takes a lot of bravery I think of Lewis and Clark, right? I spent time in Astoria, Oregon, which is the oldest town west of the Rockies. So when Lewis and Clark went on their expedition into the unknown, quite literally, facing obviously wildlife, but tribal nations that were not always friendly to them.
So for
Um,
people that are listening, give the reference just for a second. Because you might have
Right. So
people that don't know the
Lewis,
reference.
yeah. So Lewis and Clark in the Western expansion from the eastern coast, the eastern part of the United States, it was two men accompanied by a Native American woman, and they set out to say, well, how far does America go? Where does it end? Well, on their voyage, the or known as the Oregon Trail, they eventually landed in I can't remember the exact. It's just across the little bay from Astoria, but essentially Astoria, Oregon, is where they landed. And that's where they set base. And they said, okay, now we know, and we can continue to set up travel routes. So I make this reference to say that it's incredibly scary, right? To go out there literally into the wild or intellectually, emotionally into the wild, right? The unknown. What's
Mhm.
far more safer and far less brave is to close up, pretend that we're certain, even though we have that little seed of a doubt in our mind, maybe. Or maybe we've gotten very good at saying, no, 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 I know exactly what this is. It's far more secure and, well, it appears far more secure. It's far more safe to just kind of close up. I think my interpretation of that is it's very much protecting your own ego to do that. You know, we it's tough to sell somebody your expertise, and I deal with this a lot. People ask me, "Are you an attorney?" I say, "Well, no, here's why," right? I'm different than an attorney, and I'll talk about that. I think what people are looking for in many cases is expertise. They want to know that I have 100% certainty in how I deal with them professionally, right? But any good attorney and honest attorney will tell you, well, there's no absolute certainty because I'm not the judge to rule on this, right? I'm not the arbitrator to award, etc. Um, so I think it comes back to protecting the ego a little bit, but unfortunately, I think a misresponse or a misjudgment to think, well, this is the only way that I can survive in this world is pretend that I'm certain, pretend that I'm an expert, even when I'm not, and ultimately protect my ego and my image. The other much better approach is to admit, well, of course I can learn something. I would hope that I'm better a year from now than today, but that only is possible if I admit, well, there's little things that I maybe don't know.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very interesting to having a perception of um yeah, just what would it be like if I were really confident, and embodying this confidence. And at some point, I have the idea that at some point you grow into that confidence.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
almost like fake it until you make it. Even it has some limits,
Yeah.
but that's the idea. Yeah.
There is something to that, right? This idea that we can be more competent than we feel, right? What I love to bounce this idea around with is two concepts. It's competence and confidence. Those
Mm,
are not the same, but we tend to think, well, a confident person is very competent. Their competence is where their confidence comes from, right? Because they make nothing but 3-point shots and they have 100% bucket rate. That's why they're so confident. Not really.
yeah.
Ideally, that's how it works, but very often that's not. And so I think there is kind of that imposter syndrome, right? Is when we're better than we think that we are. And so we need to sort of fake it till we make it a little bit until we believe ourselves, you know? But the reverse effect is that we pretend to be far more competent than we really are. And then we deny the space that we could be growing in.
True. True.
Yeah.
You were talking before about creating safe space. You were talking more about being brave in the space. I like to talk about creating the space where both feel secure to really show up who, as who they are. And to keep the example of romantic relationship, which is my primary focus, is I realize that I'm not I wouldn't say it's the only reason why, but I think one of the reason that many couple at some point don't work out anymore is because one of them or both don't feel safe anymore. And by
Mm,
safe, I don't mean physically necessarily. I don't mean that there is a violence of some sort or not. I really mean the emotional safety to feel vulnerable, to cry if you
mm,
want to cry, or to share your celebration if you want to share celebration. And what you were talking about as a safe space makes me think of it. Even after a few years of marriage, I don't, I am very aware that we can improve on how we feel safe with each other on an emotional level.
mhm.
And that's, you were talking about Brené Brown. She has this acronym of trust. What are the component of trust? And in this, there is accountability, or there is also availability or confidentiality in sense of you're keeping for yourself what is being shared, all those things. So
Mhm.
what is your opinion on creating a safe space, and what would you say to people um, that need to create more space for emotional safety?
Well, listen to a lot more Brene Brown, that's for sure. I've learned a tremendous amount from her and Esther Perel and other people in the field like that. I mean that all sincerely, seriously, like listen to their stuff,
Mhm.
hear the way they talk about these concepts. I wasn't always so aware and discerning and empathetic, but I certainly believe that it's something that we can practice, and that's one way to practice, right? And so as we build those things up in ourselves, again, we can come to these spaces more able, more ready, more willing. More concretely, I think what people can do, this is something that I do. I create promises, you know. I promise that within this space that we're having, here's what I will do and here's what I won't do. I'll give a very simple example and then I'll give a much more emotional example. A simple example, philosophically, a lot of people don't tend to engage in those kinds of conversations regularly. And so I've noticed a general hesitation, maybe even a fear around, well, I sort of know what I'm trying to say, but I'm not sure. One of my very esteemed professors and mentors, Seth Titchener, he used to create these spaces where he'd say, I will not, I promise you, I will not let you look silly or stupid, no matter what. You can give me a half-baked thought, and that's okay because you're learning how to do this. There's no shame in it. And he would say it in his own language. I'm paraphrasing him. But I will help you. I will help you get that thought finished and polished. And then we'll run with it, right? And we'll keep going with the group. It'll be great. We'll create this great thing together, this community of learning, right? But
Mm.
I promise you, if you try, that is where I will meet you. That's a tremendous thing to create, that community, right?
Hold
So I
this.
think that's something that we could do is create those promises. Now, emotionally, it's I do this with my fiance. I say, look, I promise not to react and to judge, right? Like to understand you, even when it's really, really difficult. And if we can't do that in one session, like that's okay. I mean, that's part of the beauty of a marriage, right? You continue to learn for years and even decades what this experience of life really is for that person. So, I promise not to do that. And we have a simple phrase that we use, same team,
Yeah.
same team. I'm on the same team as you. And so you can trust me to not somehow turn my back on you or sabotage, make you look, paint you in the worst light, et cetera, et cetera. And I think fundamentally when people believe and feel that they're on the same team as the other person and that the other person feels that way about them, it's so much easier to engage, be vulnerable, and give people the pieces that they need to work better with you, right?
I love this sentence. It's really I love this example, and There is, yeah, in the end, showing up with integrity. So when you talk about making promises, is I hear behind there is values and principle you want to hold on. So you're showing up as an in with integrity,
Mhm.
which is, I think, integrity is my number one value forever. So I think it speaks to me a lot. And what you're shared as an example, which is thank you for sharing that. That's great. And I do believe that many couple forget it's not me against you, but us against the problem. And it's making all the difference. It's in my experience, what makes either this conversation turns into a big dispute or this conversation turns into what do we do?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
this is a good thing. Why do you think it's hard for many people to integrate that it's us against and not me against you? Why do you think
Yeah.
some couples start at some point to see each other as an enemy, quote, enemy at some level?
Man, I wish there was just one answer to that. I'm sure it very much depends on the individual people and the individual relationship, right? The life of that back and forth interaction that we call a relationship. Um, I think, well, here's a very prominent issue that I see that gives rise to this pattern, right? Of starting to the teamwork falling apart and then it becomes me against you. And that is the distinction between people and their behaviors. A lot of people just marry those two. As a matter of fact, they're so wedded for many people, that they were never different to begin with. They were always the same, right? You are your behaviors. I can't know your character, your integrity, your authenticity, unless I know your behaviors, right? The truth comes out, those kinds of things. Um, but here's the issue with that. And you talked about assumptions being a very big topic in your practice. And I think that's brilliant, not making assumptions. And here's why, right? When we make assumptions, not only are we might be right, but here's the problem, even with being right. We start to insipidly trap people in the characterizations that we have of them. So now we've put them in a box. Oh, I totally understand you, and maybe we're right for a time, but maybe, I don't know, New Year's resolution comes, they start a new job, they go to the gym and they're really committed, whatever it might be, and they're different. They commit to being different. Well, if we maintain that idea of them and we keep assuming, oh, they're not going to change. I know they're kind. We actually trap them in that, right? The reality is that the people are different from their behaviors. Their behaviors can change. So when
Mhm.
people are making that assumption, it becomes very easy to just go back to the same old, to default to those me versus you dynamics, and then everything kind of falls apart from there.
Yeah, I really love what you said that and yet people are not their behavior. If it's a repeated behavior, then we can probably talk about a certain pattern. But if it's one behavior, that is done here and there, or maybe just once, it's it's also something that I hear from therapists, that people are confusing behavior with who the person is. And it also makes a whole difference. I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
This is a lot of really good information here. Um, Before we end up, I have maybe one last question. So we started by talking about emotional intelligence. Um, if we just stay around the emotions, what is, according to you, the most important thing to do to have a healthy relationship, either being a romantic one or having good professional relationship with clients, customer, partners, colleagues, managers, whoever. But what is the one thing that you think society should absolutely be able to do today?
I love that. include pre-dispute mediation agreements, and just kidding. Um, but no,
Theater.
I know, right? But no, in all seriousness, I will say there's two parts to really what I'm saying is the same thing, and that is, um, make conflict okay. Make it okay to have conflict. It is not a sign of failure. Um, there's certainly conflicts that can lead to failure. Of course, nobody's not saying that, right? We all know that. But conflict in and of itself is potential,
Mhm.
So when we engage with somebody that we disagree with intellectually, or we find a puzzle piece emotionally that just I don't fit with that, okay, right? But that emotional intelligence is it creates a situation wherein we are more intelligent, we have more information, and we can then make a choice. Okay, well, you're like this, and you've been like this for a long time. It's going to be tough to learn different ways. I can accommodate that. I can compete with that. I can handle myself in all these different ways. But ultimately, we need to make conflict something that's okay. And on top of that, we also need to you make it okay to seek help when engaging with conflict. It's like moving furniture, right? Even the most
The couch.
manly machismo guys I know, they don't try to move a couch by themselves, right? They say, some things are just easier with another set of hands. It's like that. Just get a mediator. Don't wait till it's ugly. And that I think that's part of making the culture of conflict, healthy conflict, really prominent.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
Thank you. I have three more questions for like the end of the episode I like to ask. The
sure.
first one is what is one of the biggest mindset shifts you've experienced?
I think to a growth mindset, seeing myself back when as, oh, I'm very fixed. This is who I am. And I don't know whether I think about changing or I don't. Even if I do, it just sort of feels like, well, this is who I am. And that's very static. It's like a stone in a river. That's where it is. Everything around it changes, but here I am, right? Shifting away from that and towards a mindset that says, no, I change somewhat organically, right? I get older. I'm interested in different things. My body works differently, all kinds of stuff like that. And then somewhat intentionally, like if I don't like how people are responding to this type of behavior, I can change it, and I don't have to feel any type of way about it. I don't have to feel shame. Everybody has the ability to change and to choose. So why would there be shame in that?
Yeah. What, why does this not surprise me? Like from all the answers you could give from you, it doesn't surprise me, a growth mindset.
Well,
Um,
change is a beautiful thing when handled well.
yeah, it is. The other one is what is something you would consider as a failure that you actually realized afterward it was a tremendous source of growth? Talk about growth mindset, right?
Mm, a failure that I ended up realizing was growth.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I think back to my days in Astoria, Oregon. This is I love this question because I don't get to tell this story very often. People ask me, "How'd you get into conflict resolution?" And if we're just getting to know each other, and I tell them in 5 minutes, okay. But if I don't know, we're having beers and we're really just hanging out, right? Or a pot of coffee, right? Whatever it might be, then I might get into Astoria back then, being 18, 19, 20, 21 years old around those days, I was very intellectual and very just rational. I led with my head. I was very logical. I still very much am that way, right? But I've just developed my emotional intelligence a lot more. I was what I would call very lopsided, right? I was overly developed on one, less developed on the other. And I think really that ended up creating a kind of failure for reasons that I won't go into, for just to be concise. But yeah, it made all kinds of things difficult. But what I realized is, I had to really follow out that passion in order to kind of see where that leads and to learn for myself, not because somebody else told me, because my dad or some professor or somebody else told me, I don't think you're going to like where that's going to go." I just had to see it through for myself and say, now I'm here where I wanted to be. And I don't like it as much as I thought. So yeah, that ended up leading me into conflict resolution and growing a lot more.
Yeah, that's that's a good how it turns out. Yeah, that's a good path. And the last question I have is more about if you had one piece of advice, for someone that they can follow through life, what would it be?
Can always continue to see the best in other people and yourself for that matter. There are plenty of people that sell themselves a little short. And I say that knowing very well that there are, and rightfully so, people have their own reasons, but there are pessimistic people, there are cynical people, there are people that have been hurt, that have very, very good, valid reasons for not wanting to do that. But I say that because the wager of seeing the best in other people will always create more possibilities for better things, for constructive things, for things that we all want than not doing that, right? It's a little like the saying, we miss every swing we don't take. Well, we miss every opportunity we don't see because we don't see the good in other people,
Yeah,
right? We will be wrong, but it tends to net positive in my experience, in my view.
that's a perfect conclusion. Yeah. Thank you very much. That was great. A lot of food for the brain and the soul, as always. Thank you very much. That was really good.
My pleasure. Thanks for
I
having
know
me.
you're very active on LinkedIn, so if people are interested to follow your journey, where do you want me to direct them?
Well, they can read about me and my work, my business, Mosaic Collaborative Consulting at mosaiccollaborative.consulting. Um, along with my other consultants, you can read about us on the About Us page. Always feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and feel free to send me an email, alec@mosaiccollaborative.com.
Okay, I'll put all the link in the description anyway of the episode so people can just click on it. Well, Alec, thank you. That was a great conversation.